What if I told you that the emotions you carry every single day may not even belong to you? Think about the last time you walked into a crowded room and felt drained without a single word spoken, or when you sensed someone's sadness before they ever confessed it. Most people dismiss this as overthinking or being too sensitive, but what if it's something far more powerful? Carl Jung once hinted at a forgotten explanation, a truth about people like you who can feel the invisible weight of others. He didn't see it as weakness, he saw it as a window into the collective unconscious, a living proof that our minds are more connected than we dare to admit. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes you'll discover why being an empath is not just about carrying too many feelings. It's about holding a key that ancient philosophers and modern thinkers, from Nietzsche to Viktor Frankl, have wrestled with. By the end of this video, you will understand why your sensitivity may be the very gift that the world desperately needs right now. You'll see why what feels like a curse of exhaustion can become a compass for meaning, connection, and even strength in a ruthless world. I want you to imagine your life not as someone constantly weighed down by emotions, but as someone standing at the edge of a deeper truth. Because once you grasp Jung's forgotten explanation of the empath, you'll never see yourself the same way again. So don't click away. The next few minutes may shift the way you understand not only your emotions, but the hidden architecture of the human soul. You think you know what it means to be too sensitive. Maybe people told you that your feelings were excessive, that you overreacted, that you needed to toughen up. But what if all those labels were wrong? What if your sensitivity was never a weakness, but evidence of something ancient, something Jung believed humanity has nearly forgotten? Carl Jung didn't use the trendy word empath, but he described people like you with striking precision. He spoke of thin boundaries between the conscious self and the collective unconscious. In simple terms, you don't just feel your own emotions, you absorb the atmosphere of the people around you like a sponge. Their anger sits on your chest, their sadness drips into your bloodstream. Their joy can light up your body before you even know why you're smiling. Here's the brutal truth. Most of society still doesn't understand this. We are told to admire logic, independence, self-control. But if you're an empath, your reality is the opposite. You sense more than you can explain, and this isn't random. Jung saw it as an archetype, a universal human pattern that reappears across cultures. The healer, the mystic, the feeler, in every tribe. Empaths are not anomalies, they are carriers of collective memory. Think back to a moment in your own life. Perhaps you walked into a room and felt a sudden heaviness in your chest, long before anyone said a word. Minutes later, you found out someone had just received bad news. You weren't imagining it, you were registering a signal beneath words, picking up what others couldn't. And yet, you probably doubted yourself. Society taught you to dismiss it as coincidence. But Jung would argue it was proof of your deep attunement to the unconscious field that binds us all. Let's pause here. Ask yourself this: how many times have you mistaken someone else's pain as your own? That anxiety you carried, was it always yours, or was it borrowed from a parent, a friend, a stranger on the subway? If this question makes you uneasy, it's because your mind knows the answer. You've been carrying ghosts that don't belong to you. Most people think empathy is just kindness, but what if kindness is only the surface? Jung believed the empath is a vessel for the archetype of compassion, and that archetype comes with both light and shadow. The light is obvious, you connect, you comfort, you heal. The shadow is harder to face, you get lost, you blur boundaries, you forget who you are because you feel who everyone else is. Here's what no one tells you: that blurring isn't weakness, it is an evolutionary inheritance. Imagine the ancient tribes. Survival depended not just on hunters and fighters, but on those who could sense invisible tensions, who felt danger in the air before the enemy attacked, who picked up the despair of the sick and found ways to nurture them back to life. Without empaths, communities fractured. Your sensitivity in that sense is survival encoded into your nervous system. Take Arthur Schopenhauer. He argued that compassion is the root of morality, that humans are bound together by a thread of suffering. Empaths are the living evidence of his claim. You don't just know suffering intellectually, you feel it in your body. That's why injustice stings you sharper than most. That's why cruelty lingers in your mind long after others have forgotten. But here's the paradox. What once was survival now feels like overload. In a world where constant exposure to emotions floods you, social media arguments, news cycles of tragedy, crowded cities, your ancient gift can feel like a curse. You weren't designed to carry the pain of 7 billion people. Yet that's exactly what the modern world demands of you. Are you feeling that too? That exhaustion you can't explain, that endless empathy fatigue. Jung would tell you, you're not broken, you're simply misaligned with the environment. The archetype still serves its purpose, but today you need tools your ancestors never had. Picture this. A young woman enters a party. She hasn't spoken to anyone yet, but she already feels her chest tighten. Someone is anxious here. Someone is angry. The tension is thick, invisible. Her friends laugh, oblivious, but she feels a storm beneath the surface. Later, she discovers two friends were in the middle of a hidden conflict. She sensed it before it was revealed. That's not superstition. That's Jung's empathic archetype in action. So why do we ignore this part of ourselves? Why do we tell people like her to lighten up, when in truth they are reading signals the rest of us can't? The answer is simple. Society fears what it can't measure. Feelings are messy. Intuition doesn't fit into spreadsheets. But you know better. You've lived the evidence in your own skin. Like a mirror, you reflect the emotions of the world. But mirrors can shatter if they carry too much weight. That's why recognizing Jung's explanation matters. It reframes your life. You're not overreacting. You're not weak. You're tuned into a frequency most people have forgotten exists. And here's the deeper twist. If you can learn to separate what's yours from what isn't, your empathy transforms. You move from victim of emotions to translator of them, from being drowned by feelings to guiding others through them. That is the hidden potential Jung left us. But that's only the surface, because if Jung was right, your sensitivity isn't just about managing emotions. It's about touching something larger, the collective unconscious itself. And once you realize that, the way you see your identity begins to change forever. You've probably been told that feeling deeply is a gift. But tell me this, why does it so often feel like a curse? If empathy is supposed to make you compassionate, why does it leave you drained, anxious, or even resentful? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Being an empath is not only about connection, it's also about struggle. And no one captured this tension better than philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche and Jean-Paul Sartre. Nietzsche believed that those who feel most intensely are also the ones who suffer most intensely. In his view, sensitivity isn't weakness. It's an open wound in a brutal world. You don't just experience joy or sadness like everyone else. You experience them amplified, as if your emotions have no filter. That's why the same event that barely shakes others can feel catastrophic to you. You're not imagining it. You're carrying the burden of perception itself. Imagine this. Your friend shrugs off an argument with their boss. You, on the other hand, replay the words in your head for days as though you were the one being scolded. It's not your conflict, but you live it as if it were. This is the Nietzschean paradox. The deeper your ability to feel, the deeper the risk of despair. Nietzsche once wrote, "To live is to suffer, to survive is to find some meaning in the suffering." For empaths, that survival is an everyday battle. Now let's move to Sartre. He believed existence is defined by freedom and responsibility. But for you, freedom is never simple. You don't live only with your own choices, you live with the weight of others' emotions. Sartre called this the burden of existence. For an empath, it becomes the burden of other people's existence. You walk into a room and suddenly you're carrying 20 invisible lives on your shoulders. You didn't choose it, but you feel it all the same. Here's the brutal truth. This burden often makes you feel guilty for things that aren't even yours. A colleague fails and you feel responsible. A partner struggles and you blame yourself for not doing enough. Sartre would argue that this is the price of consciousness. You can't turn away from the pain of others without betraying your own sense of authenticity, but at the same time, you can't carry it all without breaking. Picture this scenario. A ruthless boss lays off a dozen employees to cut costs. Most people shake their heads, feel bad for a moment, and then move on. But you, if you're an empath, don't just watch. You lose sleep. You imagine their families, their rent, their children's faces at the dinner table. It gnaws at you long after the event has passed. This is where empathy collides with power. Machiavelli once wrote that leaders must be cold, even ruthless, to survive. By that logic, your empathy looks like weakness. But is it really weakness, or is it a different kind of strength the world refuses to recognize? Let's be honest, the modern world doesn't reward sensitivity. It rewards speed, efficiency, ambition, and so you feel trapped, caught between two opposing forces. On one side, your empathy pulls you deeper into connection. On the other, society pressures you to harden, to ignore, to keep moving. And in that collision, you suffer. But pause for a second. Ask yourself, is the pain you feel always your own? Or is it the echo of someone else's despair trapped in your nervous system? If you've ever woken up tired after a day of carrying friends or co-workers through their crises, you already know the answer. The fatigue is real. It is the struggle of being a vessel. This is why Nietzsche warned of nihilism. When you feel too much without finding meaning, life itself can seem unbearable. And this is why Sartre insisted on responsibility. You must claim ownership of your freedom, even when the weight of others threatens to drown you, because without that choice, you disappear into their shadows. Here's a paradox you can't ignore. Most people think empaths are gentle, fragile souls, but in reality, you live with a violence most people never face. The violence of constant bombardment, the violence of carrying invisible storms, and surviving that day after day is not fragility, it is resilience of the highest order. So where does this leave you? You can either numb yourself, cut off, and pretend you don't care, or you can lean into the struggle, not as a victim, but as someone learning to transform the burden into insight. Think of it like this. Most people live inside their own narrow circle of feeling. You, however, live inside a chorus. It's noisy, it's overwhelming, but it also means you hear truths no one else does. Most people chase comfort. Few are willing to face suffering head on. You don't have that luxury. Your sensitivity forces you into confrontation with pain, with injustice, with raw humanity. Nietzsche would say this suffering is the furnace that forges greatness. Sartre would say it's the unavoidable weight of freedom. Both point to the same reality. Your struggle isn't meaningless. It's a doorway. And yet that's not enough, because if you stop here, all you have is pain. What comes next is crucial. The possibility of turning suffering into purpose. That's the transition we'll explore. But for now, remember this. You are not weak because you feel too much. You are strong because you survive what most people will never even notice. You know the struggle by now, the exhaustion, the constant weight of other people's emotions pressing against your chest. But here's the question you've probably been afraid to ask yourself. What if this suffering isn't just a curse? What if hidden inside the pain is a gift so rare, so transformative, that it could change the way you live forever? Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived the horrors of the Holocaust, once said, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." He discovered that even in the darkest conditions imaginable, humans could find freedom through meaning. And here's the revelation. If you are an empath, your suffering is not random. It can become the raw material for meaning. Think of the times you felt consumed by emotions. Maybe you broke down after listening to a friend's heartbreak, even though it wasn't your relationship that ended. Maybe you carried the grief of a stranger whose story you only read online. That pain felt pointless in the moment, but Frankl would argue that the very ability to feel so deeply is a doorway to meaning. Why? Because suffering without meaning crushes you, but suffering with meaning shapes you. Here's where Aldous Huxley adds another layer. He believed that human beings can access states of consciousness where the walls between self and other dissolve. He called it the perennial philosophy, a timeless insight found across mystical traditions. Empaths, in a sense, live closer to this state than anyone else. You already sense the unity others can only glimpse in meditation or psychedelics. Yes, it overwhelms you, but it also means you stand at the edge of transcendence. Picture this. A musician who feels everything pours those emotions into sound. Their songs heal millions. A writer transforms private grief into words that comfort strangers across the globe. An activist channels the pain of the oppressed into movements that reshape history. What do they all have in common? They suffer deeply, but they transmute that suffering into meaning that outlives them. That is the hidden gift of being an empath. Let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered why some of your darkest experiences end up becoming the very stories that connect you most with others? That heartbreak, that breakdown, that season of burnout, you didn't just survive it, you turned it into wisdom, and when you shared it, someone else whispered, "That's exactly how I feel. I thought I was alone." In that moment, your suffering became a bridge. This is where your power lies. You don't need to silence your emotions. You need to redirect them, to craft meaning out of chaos, to use what hurts you as a guide toward what heals others. Frankl's entire philosophy was that meaning is never discovered in abstract theories. It's discovered in the lived tension between pain and purpose. For you, that means your overwhelm isn't the end of the story. It's the raw material of your destiny. But let's be honest, meaning doesn't erase pain, it reframes it. When you learn to see your sensitivity as a tool rather than a trap, you stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What for?" That tiny shift changes everything. Instead of drowning in feelings, you become an alchemist, turning raw emotion into gold. Think of Huxley's insight again. He saw empathy not as fragility, but as an opening into the greater consciousness that unites humanity. When you feel someone else's pain, you're touching the same truth mystics and poets have described for centuries, that we are not separate, that your boundary is thinner, not because you are weak, but because you are closer to reality. So where does this leave you? You can continue treating empathy as a burden, forever running from emotions that don't seem to end, or you can start treating it as a compass, pointing you toward the work, the art, the relationships that give life meaning. That doesn't mean rescuing everyone. It means recognizing that your gift is not to carry every weight, but to translate pain into insight. And here's the beautiful paradox. The very thing that almost breaks you is the same thing that can save you. Your exhaustion points you to the need for boundaries. Your despair points you to the necessity of purpose. Your overwhelm points you to the possibility of transcendence. In this way, your suffering stops being random noise and starts becoming a coded message, one only you can decode. But don't think the story ends here, because while Frankl and Huxley show us the path to meaning and transcendence, there is an even greater question waiting. If empathy connects you to suffering and meaning, could it also connect you to something larger than humanity itself? Could this forgotten trait actually be a doorway to the collective unconscious Jung described? That's where we're headed next. What if the very thing you've been taught to hide, your sensitivity, your exhaustion, your emotional intensity, turns out to be the clearest evidence of a hidden truth Jung never wanted us to forget? What if being an empath isn't about fixing what's wrong with you, but about rediscovering something essential about the human soul? Let's bring it all together. Jung argued that every person carries a link to the collective unconscious, a vast ocean of symbols, instincts, and shared emotions that connect us beyond words. Most people live with thick walls separating them from this reality. You, as an empath, live with thinner walls. That's why you sense what others miss. That's why you absorb what others deny. And that is why your life often feels heavier than theirs. But here's the twist. You're not just a victim of this openness. You are proof of it. The empath is not a mistake of evolution. The empath is a messenger. Think of Schopenhauer's compassion, Nietzsche's suffering, Sartre's burden, Frankl's meaning, Huxley's transcendence. All of them converge in you. You carry suffering, you wrestle with freedom, you ache for meaning, and you glimpse unity. That is not weakness. That is the human condition in its rawest, most honest form. Imagine looking back at your life through this lens, the moments you thought were failures, the times you cried too much, cared too much, felt too much. They were never failures. They were signals. They were the universe reminding you of a gift most people bury beneath noise and distraction. You weren't overreacting, you were attuned, you weren't fragile, you were awake. Let's get practical for a moment. What do you actually do with this realization? First, you stop apologizing for feeling. Your sensitivity is not something to be excused. Second, you start setting boundaries, not as walls, but as filters, choosing where your gift is needed and where it is wasted. And third, you begin translating emotions into meaning, whether through art, leadership, teaching, or simply presence. You let your empathy become action. Think of it this way. Most people walk through life like closed doors. You are an open window. Of course the wind is stronger through you. Of course the storms shake you harder. But that same openness lets in the light. That is why Jung's explanation still matters. He saw that the empath archetype is not about fragility, it's about access. Access to the truth that we are not isolated islands, but interconnected beings sharing one vast ocean. And here's the big reward, the realization that your life's weight was never meaningless. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment you carried emotions that weren't yours, it was all pointing you back to this truth. You are not separate. The very thing that nearly broke you is the same thing that makes you extraordinary. Now I want you to pause and really take this in. You've spent years believing that your empathy is a flaw, but what if it's your greatest strength? What if this forgotten explanation by Jung is the key to seeing yourself clearly for the first time? Not as someone who needs to be fixed, but as someone who needs to be recognized for the rare, vital role you play in a disconnected world. So here's my challenge to you. The next time you feel overwhelmed by emotions, don't ask, why am I like this? Ask instead, what is this moment asking me to translate? Because that is your role. Not to drown in the flood, but to show others what the flood means. And that brings us full circle. The empath is not weak. The empath is not broken. The empath is the living reminder that Jung was right. We are bound together by invisible threads. And if you choose to wield this gift, you can transform not only your own life, but the lives of everyone you touch. So don't run from your sensitivity. Don't bury it. Step into it. Own it. Because in a world drowning in noise, the empath hears the silent cry. The question now is, what will you do with that gift? If this spoke to you, if it gave you a glimpse of yourself you hadn't seen before, then don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into the hidden truths that shape your life. And remember, You are not alone in this. You are part of something greater, and that, more than anything, is the power Jung never wanted us to forget.